Things just seem to repeat themselves. There's nothing new under the sun, you've heard it said. I believe somebody said that in the scripture, Solomon. But when we were singing the hymn, I just flipped the page over. What was that? WWJD, What Would Jesus Do? The bracelets that got real popular. What was that? Yeah. But it got real popular like 20 years ago or maybe 30. And it still comes back. Well, hymn number 814 is titled, What Would Jesus Do? And it was written in 1899, over 100 years ago. So, we sometimes think we're real smart because we come up with something new. Nah, we're just copying somebody else probably. We are in the book of Daniel, chapter 4, and we said this before, but we just want to remind ourselves, the book of Daniel is written for the Jews. It's not written for, Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. It's where it happened. But the lessons that are taught here are not necessarily for the one who's the target. In this case, we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar. But it's for us to draw the lesson from him and see what he did wrong, the mistakes he made, and how we can, correct in our own lives. So in that view, not only did the book of Daniel have value to the Jews, it still has value to us today as Christians because we see what he was doing and we can challenge ourselves and say, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to do that. So we are in chapter 4, and the first question reads, observe a common flaw of those who are at the top of their game.
Get arrogant, refuse to give God the credit and the glory.
Yeah, we get arrogant. We start saying I'm the greatest, or we start saying nobody's better than me, or we start acting that way whether we say it or not, and we treat everybody as if we are their superior. And this doesn't have to be in a game like checkers. I mean, it's like in our life about who we are as people. And sometimes people think that because they're Christians, they're following Jesus, they act like they're better than the rest of the world. They'd never say that. But they might talk down about people who aren't following God. People who are not following God ought to have our mercy. They ought to have our compassion. We ought to be sharing the gospel with them, not calling them names because they're not, as good as we are. So yeah, what do we read in the first 3 verses? What's Nebuchadnezzar doing? Well, but only in the sense that I'm great. I'm praising God because he's made me great. It's kind of a backwards thing. You've heard of those backhanded compliments, Well, yeah. Arrogance and pride, they're at the top of the sins we need to avoid, because I think everything's kind of behind that selfish point of view.
It's like an announcement of proclamation.
Yeah. Like I'm proclaiming how great I am. Yeah, it is an announcement, it is a challenge. And again, we struggle, I think, because we want to have confidence. We need to do or practice our whatever it is we're working at until we become good at it and better than we were. But even as we succeed in that, that doesn't put us in a situation where we can brag to God about it or brag to other people about it. Because I've probably shared this with you before. I read this that 2 men were at a party in Chicago, and they got in a discussion and they disagreed. And one man kept saying this point of view, and the other guy was just rawr, he was just almost angry in his opposition to what the first man was saying. And finally, the first man said, well, would you accept what the Encyclopedia Britannica says? And the angry fellow said, well, yes. So they went and found a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and they looked it up, and the guy read it, and he said, well, I was wrong, and you're right. And the first guy said, well, I thought that's what I'd written. So in effect, the second guy was arguing with the expert, and he was calling the expert stupid and wrong, when in truth, the expert knew more about it than he did, but he just didn't recognize and read that. We had arrogance on the part of the second man, but not on the first man. They're both strong in their feelings, their opinions. All right, question 2. What is common about most dreams? Oh, go ahead.
So we can glean, like, what did we do? Like when we have a story in Genesis where they were building the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
We were building a pedestal trying to get closer to God, putting ourselves,
Making ourselves equal. Yeah.
making ourselves equal. We have it in this, well, the New King James Version, where Nebuchadnezzar is praising the Most High who has worked for me. Not in, like, that is one of those things that we need to recognize, that God blesses us
Mm-hmm.
because it's His will. We pray, yes, He loves to bless us. He loves to bless like His children. He loves us. But again, it is because His will, not because of, he does not work for us. He is not
Yeah.
subsequent to us. He is not doing us a favor.
And in the next chapter, Daniel says, God put Nebuchadnezzar, made him king. So he's right in that God has put him in that position. But the motivation and the attitude is what Nebuchadnezzar has been struggling with from the very beginning of the book. He was an arrogant jerk. What can I say? I mean, he may have been king of the world, but nevertheless, he was so puffed up with his own importance and his own skills.
On the other spectrum, Charles, I know we're not supposed to brag about ourselves, but we also don't need to put ourselves down either.
That's what I was trying to get to a while ago, and that's where Christians struggle. We put ourselves down an awful lot. And so what's the difference in having this confidence in ourselves and confidence in God without being arrogant? How do we do that?
Yeah, it is that we have been selected by the Creator. We have the ability that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish. So He sacrificed His only Son for our privilege, to give us the opportunity. So we are important. We are.
He called and we answered.
Yeah, right. And we have taken that. We've taken that sacrifice and done this. So there is that balance between, okay, God is number one because He's God, but we are His children. We again have accepted that gift, and in multiple times we have that ability to now, okay, look, this is like it's our duty, it's our job. Like we have the confidence, and a lot of those situations where we take that on ourselves and we go and we witness to individuals, or when we try to bring the gospel to people in the community, and they're like, no, well, they're not denying you. There's a lot of buffer space there.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Davis?
I was just going to say, we've got to always give Him all of the credit. And we can't take anything for ourselves because we didn't do it. He didn't.
Yeah. He may have done it through us, but he did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give God the credit, no matter how great you are. And I see some sports people occasionally on the TV, and they will hit a home run or catch a hard ball or score a touchdown, and they'll point up. And I'm glad to see that, because our world has got to the point now where there's so many people who don't believe in God that it takes a certain amount of, if you please, even courage for someone to do something in an athletic situation and then say, I give credit to God for that. All right, good. Anyone else?
And if somebody gives you a compliment, you gotta learn how to take compliments.
No.
Say, thank you, not, oh, it was, you know.
Yeah. Be gracious. Yeah. All right, good. Anyone else? The next question. Question 2. Wow. Just now getting to 2. What's common about most dreams? That's going to probably depend on the individual to some extent, but still, what's common about most dreams? Forget the dream? I haven't remembered a dream in I don't know how many years. But what else is common about dreams?
Don't know what they mean.
Don't know what they mean. If I remember it. Because what are dreams? They're usually kind of, a page ripped out of here and a half a page ripped out of something else, and it's all put together, and you wake up and you're like, what did that mean? And you think, well, I ate too much for dinner or something, and you had this weird dream. Dreams don't typically mean anything. When we wake up and after having had a dream, we don't say, oh, I've got to go plant my corn. Or I've got to go whatever. We don't do that because we don't understand the dreams. We don't interpret and make sense out of them. Some of them may be weird, and we may tell somebody about it, but for the most part, we don't.
And it's a good thing sometimes in my case.
Yeah.
I'm falling down, I wake up before I hit the ground. So.
Yeah. Well, I've got some stories about dreams, but we won't go on about that. All right, question 3. Offer your thoughts about Daniel's late arrival. Verse 8.
That's when Daniel asked for time to be able to interpret the dream.
Yeah, that's correct. But before that, he was the last one there. He brings in all the other wise guys, wise men.
You're right the first time.
Yeah. And told them the dream. They could not interpret it. Verse 8. Now, we're just thinking out loud, grabbing for an opinion. And my thoughts are this. If Daniel had showed up with all the other wise men, and Daniel had interpreted the dream, who would have gotten credit? All of them. But by showing up late, after everybody else is saying, we don't have a clue, Daniel can come in, and he is not just Daniel interpreting the dream, it's Daniel's God. So he is doing this in a way that makes God stand out, or it should at least make God stand out in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar. He never seems to quite get it. We talked about that last week, and we'll be talking about it in the next chapter as well. So I don't know if that was planned, or if it was Daniel's thing or God's thing, or whether it just was circumstances that they didn't tell Daniel in the beginning because they didn't think it was important enough. I don't know, but from what I'm looking at it, when Daniel shows up after everybody else has said, we don't know, then it's obvious when Daniel interprets the dream, he stands out, and his God stands out. Yes? Good question. The first dream, he wouldn't even tell them what it was, and now he's telling them the dream. I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, maybe this time, he wanted somebody else to see. Because last time, nobody could do it. This time, maybe those
Yeah. Maybe he was looking for a little help. I don't have a clue as to why he did that differently at this time. But he did. You know, he tried to give him that advantage.
Maybe he wanted to give this wise man a chance to tell him what he wanted to hear.
Redeem themselves, tell them what he wanted to hear. Okay.
But at least they were honest, and we can't interpret this dream either. So
Yeah.
they were honest about that too.
Yeah. And, you know, these guys, you and I know that they had no powers. But when they heard a dream, they probably got together in the huddle and says, what can we tell him? And so they would put a compilation together of a little interpretation, and then they would go and say, okay, King, this is what it means. But this one apparently is so confusing, they couldn't figure out a way to come up with a good story. And so they would basically say, we don't know. All right, question 4. Generally comment on what you understand about the dream. This is verses 10 through 17.
What all the living things on earth, the trees, birds, the animals. Throw that out there.
Go ahead, we don't care.
Unusual dream, sure.
Yeah. So what do you see the tree as? Who does the tree represent? Okay.
I've never had a dream like this.
Anyone else?
I didn't hear what he said, but the tree, God has, he has made manifest the gifts that he has given and the things that he has given. And so these are the gifts that he has given Nebuchadnezzar. And so now then, Nebuchadnezzar sees it and he thinks it's himself. And so God is going to show him that it's not him, you know, and not only that, it's for us to understand that no matter how much God blesses us, it's God, it's not ourselves, and we really can do very little, if anything.
Yeah. Good. Anyone else? We're tempted to take credit for things over which we haven't had a whole lot of input. Now, I grant you there are some things that you accomplish because of a lot of hard work, a lot of practice. And I've told as an illustration several times through the years about a basketball player Larry Bird and also Michael Jordan. You know what both of them typically did after practice? Everybody else would leave and they'd stay another hour and shoot 3-pointers. Now, you know, that was their commitment, their dedication, and their practice. They did that. So you can't say it was natural. Did they have some natural skills? Of course. But they honed and they developed those skills. And that applies to everything in life, you know, if we put forth that effort. But even though, got another story, even though we've done that, we don't need to take all the credit for it. I read a story years ago about a fella who bought a piece of ragged land. I mean, it was really rough. And he went to work and he turned it into a really nice farm, very plentiful with his crops. And he invited the preacher to come and have lunch, and the preacher came out and he saw this beautiful piece of land and how, you know, it was producing all these crops. And he said to the farmer, the man, he says, God has really blessed you with a fruitful piece of land here. And the farmer said, yeah, but you should have seen it when he had it all to himself. You know, it takes some work. We have to do something. And to just sit around with our hands out and say, you know, drop it in my lap, God, that's not going to happen.
And who gave him that attitude
To do the work,
to work it?
yeah,
God gave you that.
we still have to act on it. You know, yes, we have talents. Yes, you have skills. Yes, you've got brain power. But if you don't use it, then what good is it?
Years ago, Bob Arterbury, in one of our classes, said, I don't believe in talent, I believe in hard work.
Yeah,
So, hard work beats talent every time.
yeah. Question 5. Draw a conclusion about King Nebuchadnezzar from verses 4, 8, and 18 and the dream that he had. Yes?
The word that keeps resounding is I.
I. And what does that say about him?
Very self-centered.
Very self-centered. So there's a balance. There's a balance that we need to have, and it was brought up a minute ago. We need to have confidence. We need to have a sense of our ability and be willing, you know, to recognize that. We don't need to be putting ourselves down. But at the same time, when it's I, we still,
Who enabled him, though?
right.
He was contented in verse 4. He's at home, and he's in his palace, contented and prosperous.
Yeah.
How did he get that way?
And when we're in that mode, we're self-centered, and for all practical purposes, we've made ourselves God. When all I want to do is what I want to do, then that's bad in relationships. If I'm a kid growing up in a family and I want the whole family to do what I say it to do, then that's selfishness. If I'm a spouse in a relationship and all I want to do is what I want to do, then that's selfishness. If you know, whatever relationship we're in, now it typically doesn't work well when you go to work for a person or a company and you want to do things your way, because that typically doesn't work well with your bosses. And it's probably going to come back to get you. So the narcissistic, which is a more modern term, I don't know when that term was coined, but maybe it's because I hadn't run across very many narcissistic people. But there's a lot of narcissism going on in our world today. As a matter of fact, our society, our culture is almost totally narcissistic. It's all me, which means I'm God. I run my own life. I do things my way. There's no humility there. It's arrogance and pride. Anyone else?
And still, Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't give God the credit because he even gave Daniel a name that's one of the names of his God.
Yeah. They had a lot of gods, and he gave Daniel maybe one of his favorite ones. I don't know, but that's what he named him. You know, we sometimes give people nicknames, but this is like an official name change here for Daniel. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, question 6. Give a possible reason for Daniel's hesitation in verse 19. Yeah. Right. That seems to be a prevalent thing in ancient times. Somebody comes up and gives us bad news, and we get angry with them. Yeah. I sense a hesitation there. You know, sometimes we are a little too eager, and we need to give people a minute to take a breath and absorb things. And it is true that if you're too eager to tell somebody some bad news, it's almost like you're gloating over them. No, that's not what we're doing. We're trying to be sympathetic and have this connection with them. And you know, I've never done this with well, not with the police, but I have done it with people. That I was put in a situation where I had to say to some young children, had to let them know that their mother had died. And that wasn't something that, I was eager to do. It wasn't something that I just wanted to run up and say, hey, Mom died, come on home, I'm taking you out of school. I wasn't flippant, I wasn't casual, I wasn't glorifying myself or acting like I knew, no. It's something you approach with a certain amount of hesitation. Doctors and police frequently have to do this.
And two, Daniel, when he was talking to Nebuchadnezzar, was a Jew. He was actually, I suppose, a captive and a slave, but he had freedom. But he was dealing with the king,
Mm-hmm.
King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful person in the world at the time. And so you're going to tell him some bad news? I would hesitate a long time.
Right. Yeah, I think we all would. Good.
He'd already told him one time. And it's gonna be the same thing this time.
Yeah. But the whole idea of the kind of man that Nebuchadnezzar was, you get the feeling that even though he wants information from his wise man, even they are careful in what they're going to express because they don't want to make him mad. So I can understand being, what would you say? You want to say something to a person in a nice way. What's a term for that? Tactful. Yeah.
Quite a task when you don't know the people, and you have to go, we call it notification,
Right?
and we asked the dispatcher's chaplain of it,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about do some hard praying,
Yeah.
open, but he wasn't always available. So we'd have to go in there to somebody's home, into their living room. By the time you got halfway in there and sat down, they knew,
I already know.
we got the cops here, something bad has happened.
Yeah.
And then we would notify them, for instance,
We had a young lady who was on the highway patrol, and she called me a couple of times to be their chaplain. And that's tough, to be with somebody as they learn that their close relative just died. Yeah. All right. Next question. Why would Daniel repeat the dream to the king?
Make sure they're talking about the same dream.
Yeah. Are we on the same page? I'll tell you this. The last time I was in Kenya at K-City, Kenya Christian Technical Institute, the goal of K-City is to teach Kenya preachers a job skill because the churches over there cannot support their preachers, so the preachers are bivocational. And so they go to that school to learn how to support themselves because other than that, most of them are just day laborers, which is typically not enough money to have to support a family, almost even support yourself. Nevertheless, they had a meeting, special meeting, and they asked me to speak, and I did. And after it was over, after my session was over, a Kenya preacher raised his hand, and I recognized him, and he asked me a question. Well, I took about, 3 to 5 minutes answering his question. And when I finished, I turned to Greg, and I said, did I cover everything? And Greg said, that's not what he asked at all. Between his dialect and their British English, they speak British English with a Swahili accent, and so between that and my Texas whatever, I'm totally missed what he asked. Daniel is saying, are we on the same page? No. Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like he's breaking it down because he's saying this part means
Yeah. And we need to make sure we're answering the questions people are asking. Because sometimes we tell people things that's not what they wanted to know at all, because we were not listening. And the key to most conversations and relationships is our listening. And he's clarifying it. He's breaking it down. Is it this and this and this? Yes, yes, yes. We're on the same page. All right, look at verse 19b. Consider the meaning of that second half of that verse. Chapter 4, verse 19.
Again, I guess Belteshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar is telling, hey David, no matter, don't worry about it. Just tell me what it means, we'll be okay.
All right.
Nothing's gonna happen.
Anyone else? Yeah. Sometimes you ask people, can we sit down? Would you sit down? Why? Because the news you're about to tell them, you're afraid they're going to collapse anyway. So, and Daniel's response here is, Nebuchadnezzar, I wish this was about your enemies. But it's not, is it? It's about Nebuchadnezzar.
All intents and purposes, Nebuchadnezzar has been, he's placed Daniel in all of these positions.
Yeah.
So, like with a new regime change, Daniel's probably, obviously he knows God's going to take care of him, but there's some questionable stuff that's about to really happen. His world's about to change, and sometimes we reflect on that as well. Hey, sometimes we'll get bad news. The world's about to change, but God will take care of us.
Yeah. And if someone knows what's about to happen and they tell you what's about to happen and it's not good news, then there's all sorts of emotions that come forth. There's anger, there's distress, there's fear. You just told me I'm about to die. You just told me I'm going to lose my job. You just told me my company's going bankrupt. You just told me, wow. You just told me I'm going to prison. You give somebody news like that, and it's easy for them to be upset, and yeah. So Daniel is trying to prepare him.
And in this case, he's giving him a chance to change his ways.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up, because that all through this in Daniel's relationship with Nebuchadnezzar and God's relationship with Nebuchadnezzar, these are opportunities for you to change your attitude, to change your arrogance, to quit being so prideful. And if Nebuchadnezzar ever makes any change, it's like for a half a second. It doesn't last long. Anyone else?
That's for us too, Charles. We think we have all this time in the world, keep on living the way we're living, in a worldly way.
Yeah.
So I've got time to change, I've got time to change. I can watch and see you later.
Yeah, and I think most Bible believers don't necessarily see themselves as doing bad things, but there are good things we're putting off. We're postponing them. And then there are other people out there, like you said, that they know they're totally wrong and they just don't want to change yet. Like we want to change at the last minute. We want to slide into home base under the tag and be safe. Little baseball metaphor there. All right, question 9. To whom is the lesson intended? Verse 17 and verse 24. Somebody read verse 17 and someone else read verse 24.
The decision is announced by message
Who's in control? God's sovereign, yeah. Teresa in our decorating, she has a little sign that says something to the effect of, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. And that's a good thought. And when we think of ourselves as being God, which is Nebuchadnezzar's problem, then we're in trouble. Anyone else want to share anything? Yeah, absolutely. And from the beginning, all of this information was not preserved for Nebuchadnezzar. It was preserved for the Jewish people, and as it is passed on down to us. And it's the same lesson, talking about the same problem Nebuchadnezzar had: his pride, his arrogance, his lack of submitting himself to the will of God. That's it. All right, question 10. Discuss the point and purpose of verse 26 and 27.
My thought on that is, pay me now, pay me later.
Pay me now, pay me later. All right. You want to expand on that?
Well, the verses say, the command to leave the stone and the roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sin by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. Why do you put it off?
All right. So, why do you put off what?
Getting right with God.
Yeah. That's,
Doing God's will.
why do we put off repenting? Why don't we put off submitting to God? Why don't we wait? We think we do.
It's not going to happen until you do it.
And let's just imagine the scenario here. This is purely imagination. It's Judgment Day. Someone actually waited till the last hour. They had lived a long life knowing about God but never submitting to God. And in the last hour of their life before the Lord came back, they were born again. And now they're standing before Jesus in the Judgment Day. And in our story, they're saved. And they're going into the holy place with God. Well, what they have to know is they wasted all of those years where they could have been serving God. And they had 1 hour of service to give. Now, I'm not talking about stars in your crown, who's better, or anything like that. I'm just talking about the missed opportunities that we have, that we just ignore. You know, I could have been friendly to that person at church. I could have been kinder. I could have, anything, you name it. Yeah.
Being, not being raised in the church, not being whatever. I look back on all the relatives that I know that have passed away. My grandfather, all of these people that were like Nebuchadnezzar, almost there. Religious, thought they were doing right, but because, I was, everybody was just almost there. Now imagine that individual getting there and
Oh.
waiting till the last minute, now looking back, and they're just those individuals, well, he made it. How many other people did he left that
And-
only he could have touched?
And I don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're the judge, or we're saying someone's not going to be with the Lord, because we don't know everything. And we certainly don't know God's mind or heart or how he's going to judge. But we do have some parameters that we seek to get as close to as we can. But yeah, wasted opportunities. Wasted opportunities. Anyone else? All right, explore the meaning of verse 29 and 30. Why does that keep coming up? He is and we is. It's a fight we all have to have.
Why is that, Charlie? Is that, I mean, there's some people that are very arrogant,
Yeah.
and some people that are really, really, you tell them something, no, you can't, they don't accept the compliment.
Yeah. And a lot of it depends on where we are and how we're growing. But as you say, there are some people that arrogance is just overflowing on them, and there are others that they are so insecure about their value that they won't try anything. They won't do anything. And if you were the best at something, I don't care what it is, sports, preaching, teaching, business world, whatever it is, if you were the absolute best, but you never attempted it, you never tried. And there are some people that they would call that humility. You're the best fisher person in the world, best fisherman, fisherwoman, but you never fish. Why don't you? Well, I'm afraid I might not catch any this time. Okay. Again, we've got the arrogance on one side, and on the other side, we've got a total lack of confidence so that we don't do anything for God. He's on both ends, isn't he? Yeah, he will hold us down, mess us up any way he can. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I think Nebuchadnezzar may have had a tad bit of, not only arrogance, but a low self-esteem. Because he keeps trying to build himself up. I guess I do that, I do this. Nobody else is telling him that, but he himself.
Yeah, that's not expressed, but I could see how that could be a part of it. Always trying to, there are other guys out there in the kingdom, we're going to find out, that they want to be king. And that's true. You look in the political world, in our political world, and what happens, you're the best representative or the best senator or the best president, and all of a sudden it's re-election time. And someone who's in your party is running against you. And you're saying, hey, I'm so good, why are you running against me? Because they want the power. Anyone else? All right. Deliberate on the phrase, my sanity was restored, verse 34. And that quote is from the NIV. I do not know what other translations say. You can remind us if you have a different translation. That's the Junie translation, right? Okay, dawned on him. Okay, good. When did it come? Now, when was his sanity restored? Well, look at the verse. Look at the first part, the second. What? Yeah, he looked into the eyes of God. So, people talk about wanting to be happy. Well, what do people in this world do to be happy? Yeah, they go after money. They chase after men or women. They do drugs. They drink alcohol. They do all sorts of weird things in pursuit of happiness. But the real happiness is going to be found where? When you submit yourself to God. But instead, they're submitting themselves to themselves. What Nebuchadnezzar is saying here, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raise my eyes toward heaven. In other words, he finally admits to the power and sovereignty of God. And that's when he came to his senses. Now, what'd that get him out of? What's he been doing for the last 7 years? Yeah. Living like an animal, eating grass or whatever. Anyone else? And we'll echo again the question, to whom is this written? To whom is this for? Those who believe and want to follow God, including me, including this generation, as well as including the Jews of Daniel's time and the hundreds of years after that. All right, now, after that one verse, or part of a verse, look at all of verse 34. What do you see in that?
Gives the glory to God.
I praised the Most High, I honored and glorified Him who lives forever.
I think you finally got it.
Yep. Took a while. Have you ever had that happen to you? My dad brought me a little card one time, and it was black and white. Just looked like a bunch of splotches. And it was on the back side, I think it was a feed store advertising, and he had gotten it, and he brought it home and gave it to me. And I looked at it, and I didn't see anything. He said, keep looking. So I turned it, turned it, turned it, turned it. Finally, it popped out at me. It was a picture of a Holstein cow. Black and white splotches. But it wasn't the whole cow. It was, it was a close-up, and you couldn't tell what it was. It just looked like a bunch of black and white stuff. And all of a sudden, it hit me. I saw it. I ruined that card because I showed it to a friend of mine, a little neighbor boy, and he couldn't see it. And he couldn't see it. And he couldn't see it. And he was so couldn't see it that I finally took a pencil and traced around it. And then he said, oh, yeah, but I'd ruined it by then, because now everybody can see it. But Nebuchadnezzar, it's not until he understands who God is that he gets his life straight. And see, that's the same struggle we all have. You look at the Jews, I talk about the book of Judges all the time and the 40-year cycle. It's so repetitious, 40 years. Every 40 years they go astray, and then after being corrected by God, usually by a foreign power coming in and oppressing them, they finally come back to faith and repentance, and God restores them to their place. And then 40 years later, they're doing the same thing again. It's like after a couple of generations, you think, does anybody remember your history? You remember what Grandpa told you? And if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, is a modern statement. And, we look at our own country and we see, hey, you remember when what we would call the good old days? It wasn't perfect, but at least you could go to the movies without being embarrassed or, being attacked. So, do you see it? There it is, Nebuchadnezzar. All right.
Nebuchadnezzar ends with that God is, those who walk in pride, God is able to humble.
Yeah. And there, he recognized that. And if I do think pride is like at the top of the list of our problem sins in life, the pride or the arrogance where we make ourselves our own God. I think that's like number one. Other people might say, oh, it's drunkenness, oh, it's fornication. Oh. Well, you know what? What leads to those things? Our pride and our arrogance. And see, again, that's a lesson that comes on down through the centuries, even for us. Anybody else have any questions or comments or remarks? All right. We're on chapter 5 next. Have you? I think that's 5. Is that 5?
I don't know. There's not a.
Yeah, turn it over. Yeah. Yeah, these are the questions for 5. And there's an article on the back that was written by Brother David Lusk. I don't know if any of you remember David. He was a preacher here some years ago, and he's now living south of Sherman, Texas, with his I think he built a house on the property there that his son and daughter, or daughter and son, whoever it is, one of his kids owns. Well, really? And you're not angry with him? Well, I was looking at her. All right, thanks. I appreciate your participation. We had a good discussion tonight.